So we are going to continue our exploration on joy, and here's how we'll do it. First, I want to explore this word that you see in the sermon title. Life is brutiful and joy is everywhere. That word brutiful is not a spelling error. That is intentional. This word comes from somewhere, so we'll explore it. Then I want to share with you 6 very brief observations on joy, and then I want to share with you a story about my friend Mildred. And from there, we'll look at some of the biblical voices on joy and why these voices resonate so deeply with our own experiences. Are you ready? Let's go. So, Brutiful. I highly recommend this book, Carry On Warrior, The Power of Embracing Your Messy, Beautiful Life by Glennon Doyle Melton. She's quickly becoming one of my favorite writers. She's honest and real and funny, and she has something to say. In the early pages of this book, she's sharing her story about how she found new life and came into this new awareness. She found things like forgiveness and sobriety and the power of opening up to people around her. And here's what she says. The more I opened my heart to the folks in my circles, the more convinced I became that life is equal parts brutal and beautiful. And/both. Life is brutiful. Like stars in a dark sky. Sharing life's brutiful is what makes us feel less alone and afraid. The truth can't be stuffed down with food or booze or exercise or work or cutting or shopping. Hiding from the truth causes its own unique pain, and it's a lonely pain. Life is hard, not because we're doing it wrong, but just because it's hard. Does this make sense? Does this resonate? Think of the scene we saw early on with one of the opening scenes in the film Up. Carl's life went like this, didn't it? It was full of moments of brutality, these real brutal moments, and moments of joy. Up and down, that's the way life is. Life is brutiful, and joy is everywhere. I believe this. So let's look at 6 of my very brief 6 observations on joy, and then I want you all to share some of your observations on joy. Observation number 1. In the Greek, joy is kairos, stemming from the Greek word charis, which means grace or gift or kindness. And this is really cool because essentially what this is saying is joy has its roots in a word that means gift. Hold on to that one. Observation number 2. Joy comes from the awareness that life is a gift and joy is a response to that gift. Number 3, joy transcends circumstances. It comes from God's Spirit and it is woven into the very fabric of creation, as so many of the biblical writers write about. Observation 4. Joy is always connected to a sense of gratitude, and the deepest experiences of joy are usually connected to people, relationships, and creation. And number 5, the opposite of joy isn't sadness, it's fear. And joy and fear are never found at the same party. 6th and final observation on joy. Joy is experienced in moments, and it's usually ordinary, simple ones. So here's the deal. I'm assuming you all have your own observations and experiences on joy. So here's what I would invite you to do. Fill in the blank. Joy is. Now, keep your sentence short, brief. This isn't your opportunity to give us a whole philosophical paragraph on what joy is. Simple joy. And text the number on the screen, 720-253-6569. That will go back to the sound booth, and then after the sermon during the song, they will put your observations on the screen so we all can see how you all experience joy. Are you with me? Makes sense? Moving on. So here's the other thing about joy. The more we go chasing after those big moments of joy, the less joy we actually find. But the more open we are to God and the world around us, the more joy we experience. I met Mildred a year ago, May. I met Mildred on my first trip to Africa, a place called Rusinga Island in the country of Kenya. Rusinga Island is one of the poorest places in the world. It also has one of the highest HIV/AIDS rates in the world. And we were going to Rusinga Island to continue the work with Project Humanity, the work in women's empowerment. And we were doing this through the particular lens of storytelling. So knowing your story, sharing your story, hearing the stories of others, and ultimately what it means to live a better story in the community. And so we had these different story groups meeting throughout Rusinga Island throughout the week. Mildred was one of the participants in my group. And early on, Mildred shared with the group her story, and she had a pretty rough childhood. Abandonment and abuse of every kind. And she shared with us that she was also living with this disease and she was very ill. And on the last day in our group, we did our what if. So for those of you that have done Storyline in the last couple of years here at St. Luke's, you know exactly how this process works. We invited them to dream big, to not be held back by fear or money or time or energy. Don't worry about those things, but if you were just to dream big, what would you do? What if? And so we went around the circle, and they had a full day to think about this. When it came to Mildred, she said, what if I owned some land one day and built an orphanage? And it was this very quiet, powerful moment. And it was our last day there, and as I was leaving, I gave Mildred a big hug, and I said, I'm coming back next year, and I hope to see you. Mildred got quiet. Things got awkward. She looks down, and she says, Pastor, I may not be here next year. I said, what do you mean? Where are you going? She said, remember I told you I was very ill. I'm very ill. And so I didn't know if Mildred lived in kind of this pessimistic state or she was a negative Nancy, so I find a community leader, and I say to him what she had told me, and I said, is this true? He says, yes, Mildred's very ill. And so you leave with this kind of heaviness, this sinking feeling. Now fast forward 1 year to May, just a couple of months ago. I was back in Rusinga Island doing similar work. And on this particular day, it was a hard day. It was a defeating day. It was one of those days where you begin asking all the wrong questions. Like, what are we doing here? Am I making a difference? Is the work we're doing here, does it matter? Is it making any difference at all? And on this particular afternoon, we arrived at a location different than the location we were supposed to arrive. And in the distance, I step out of the vehicle, and in the distance, I see Mildred. Now, Mildred was expecting us. She knew we were in town that week, so she was expecting us to drop by at some point. But I go up to Mildred, and I give her a great big hug, and I said, it's so good to see you. And she has this smile that is plastered on her face. And she hands me this brown paper bag. And she said, here, these are gifts for your girls. She remembered I had 2 little girls. She didn't know about Breck yet. And in this bag, Selah, can you come up here a minute? I open this bag, and there's 2 necklaces, 2 bracelets, and 2 pair of shell earrings. This is a beautiful necklace and a beautiful bracelet. And get this. She says, Pastor, I'm doing it. And I said, that's great, but what are you doing? And she said, those necklaces, that bracelet, I made those. And all of a sudden, you can go sit down, baby, thank you. All of a sudden, that gift becomes a little bit bigger, doesn't it? And she says, not only that, not only do I make jewelry, I also make dresses now like this one. And she was wearing the most beautiful red dress in all of Africa. And she says, I make this stuff, and then I take it to the marketplace where I sell it. And the smile gets even bigger. And she says, don't you remember? I want to build an orphanage. Joy was all over Mildred's being, and you get the sense that she knows that every moment, every breath is a gift. Joy was in me because I was able to be the recipient of such a spectacular gift. Joy. It's when you can't help but utter those words or utter that simple prayer, oh my goodness, this is life and I actually get to participate. Here's the thing about joy. It transcends circumstances. There's this beautiful letter in the New Testament. It's called 1 Thessalonians. The Apostle Paul is writing this letter to this church in Thessalonica, and they were undergoing all this suffering and persecution. And here's how the Apostle Paul opens the letter to the Thessalonians. He says, for in spite of persecution, you received the word with joy inspired by the Holy Spirit. In other words, what he's saying to them is, I know what you're going through. I know what's happening in life, but you still receive the good news with this sense of joy. And that, my friends, comes from something holy, God's Spirit. And there's this other letter after 1 Thessalonians. It's called James, the book of James. And he opens like this. He says, my brothers and sisters, wherever you face trials of any kind, consider it nothing but joy. Have you encountered people like this, where they could be going through something really hard? They're going through a difficult time. And yet, at the same time, they still carry with them this sense of very authentic joy. Not the kind of plastered-on mask of happiness that we try to wear and say everything's fine, and it's really rooted in denial of the things that are really happening, but it's the kind of joy that's rooted in the sense, rooted in the present. Have you met people like this? And when they talk about God and gratitude, they talk about it in the most meaningful ways. I was talking to a guy just the other morning, and he was sharing with me all the things he's going through in life right now. And he starts to tear up, and he says, but I'm here. I'm here. And if you've ever been there, you know what a gift it is to be here. And sometimes that is the purest form of joy, to utter those words to God, but I'm here. I'm here. There's a great psalm. In fact, many of the psalms describe to us a sense that joy is everywhere. Joy is everywhere. It's in the fabric of creation. It's scattered throughout creation. In this psalm, he's talking about creation and the beauty of creation, and he says this right in the middle of it in verse 8. He says, those who dwell on the far edges stand in awe of your acts. You make the gateways of the morning and evening shout for joy. Where is joy? Joy is everywhere, scattered throughout all of creation. But we have to start with what we have, not with what we don't have. Fear loves to steal joy. Fear always lives in the future. Fear loves to come along and tell you everything you're not capable of, everything that's not possible. Fear loves for you to live in shame, and fear always lives in the future. Joy, on the other hand, lives in the present. It is rooted in the present. And joy says, this moment, this life matters, and this breath is a gift. It's why joy is so often connected to things like people and relationships, the things that matter most. Thursday night at our Pause group, where we've been doing it just every Thursday night in July, opening up our home for people to come sit on the back patio and talk about what it looks like in our lives for us to pause and to be present for the most meaningful moments. Someone in the group was sharing with us this recent scare that she had of potentially losing her mom. And her mom just underwent this surgery, and thankfully she's recovering. But as she's telling the story, she says, now when I go visit my mom, those moments are a bit more significant. Those moments fill me with a bit more gratitude. Why? Because you realize the fragileness of it all. What is joy? It's the response to that gift. And it's why joy is so often connected to creation. And for us Coloradans, to things like mountains. You know what I mean? Someone was just in our living room one afternoon this week, and she had just gotten back from the mountains, and she was telling Tammy and me about her experience in the mountains. And she's been there dozens of times, but she said, oh, it was so strange. There was a moment where we just looked out into the mountains, and it was like I was filled with gratitude, and it was like God did this. Now, do you know what we weren't saying? Tammy and me, we weren't saying, oh my goodness, I just don't understand. Like, what do you mean you were just looking out into the mountains and you were filled with gratitude? Explain this. No, we got exactly what she was talking about. You get it, don't you? You get the feeling of looking out into creation and being filled with a sense of awe and wonder. What is joy? It's the response to that gift. And it's why joy is found so often in the simple moments. Like when my 3.5-year-old girl, Shiloh, when she comes up to me and she says, Poppy, lift your arm. She calls an arm an arm. I think in her past life she was from Boston. She says, Poppy, lift your arm because I want to snuggle you. She can be as rambunctious and energy-filled and defiant as anyone, and then she's my girl that loves to snuggle. And it fills me with all kinds of joy. You know, on 4th of July, we finished our celebrations early this year. We were done by 8 o'clock. Mama was tired, baby Breck was tired. Me and the girls, we were wide awake. So we go up to King Soopers, and we buy some vanilla ice cream and root beer. Can you believe it? My little girls had never had a root beer float. So we made root beer floats, and we sat in the driveway, and we ate our root beer floats, or we drank them. What do you do with those? Eat them, drink them? We had root beer floats, and we watched the fireworks, and it was the most joy-filled moment I've had all summer long, sitting in the driveway doing something simple like root beer floats. What is joy? The response to that gift. Are you lacking joy? Are you lacking joy? You know, there's another great psalm right after the psalm we just read. And it's a psalm where he's crying out to God. It's a psalm of repentance. And in a sense, he's blaming this on God. And I love the psalm because he just flat out asks God for joy. And he says it like this. If we can go to the next slide. Let me hear joy and celebration again. In other words, I used to have joy, but I don't have it now. Let the bones that you, God, have crushed rejoice. Sometimes we get that way, don't we? We want to blame it on someone. Let me have joy. I don't have it anymore. Have you ever considered praying for joy? Are you going through a hard time? Experiencing more brutal than beautiful? What would it be like for you to cry out and ask for joy? Another way to think about it, praying for an awareness, an openness, to become open and aware of the gift God has given you so that you might respond in joy. Are you in a joy slump? We have to remember to start with what we have. Start with the relationships you do have, the breath you are taking. Pray for a new awareness and consider ways you might invest in other people. There's another great letter after James. It's called 1 John. And he begins the letter by saying this: We are writing you so that our joy may be complete. We're writing you, we're reaching out to you, we're investing in you so that our joy is complete. This has to do with our own wholeness, our own health, our own joy. Find people to invest in. If you're in a joy slump, find people to pour your life into. Find ways to give back together. And find ways to make life about other people, not just you. Because the truth is, the world needs you. And when you reach out to people, when you invest into other people, your joy is being made complete. So think back to the movie Up. Carl's joy was being made complete when he made the conscious decision to invest in Russell, that little 8-year-old boy who's a wilderness explorer from Tribe 54. And he finally begins to experience simple moments of joy.